A woman in Ohio spent 4 years and almost $600 replanting the same flower bed every single spring. Every August, she'd look at her yard, decide it was too late in the season to plant anything, and wait until next April. Every April, she'd start from scratch again, buying the same annuals, digging the same holes, watching them die again by October. She had no idea that August, the month she thought was dead for planting, was actually the single best window of the entire year to put something in the ground that would come back, bigger and stronger for the next 15 to 20 years, without her spending another dollar. Most gardeners have been taught completely backwards. They think spring is planting season and fall is cleanup season. But professional landscapers know a secret that garden centers don't advertise because it would cut into their spring sales. Perennials planted in August, right now before the first frost, use the warm soil and cooling air to build root systems all the way through October. Root systems so strong that next spring, these plants explode out of the ground weeks ahead of anything you plant in April. In this video, I'm giving you 13 perennials you need to get into the ground in the next few weeks before your local first frost date locks you out for the year. We're going deep on every single one. When to plant it, how deep, what it needs, and the one mistake that kills it before winter even arrives. And number 7 on this list is a plant most people accidentally destroy every single autumn because they don't realize it's supposed to look dead before it does its best work. Before we get into number 1, here's the thing about this specific window of the gardening calendar. It closes fast. Most of the USDA zones watching this video have somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks left before the ground gets too cold for root establishment. And I'm not going to make a second version of this video next year with updated dates. If you subscribe now and turn on notifications, you'll catch the exact timing reminder videos I post as each zone's cutoff approaches, because August means something different in Minnesota than it does in Georgia, and I don't want you missing your window by even a week. Peonies are, without exaggeration, one of the longest living perennials you can put in American soil. Well-documented specimens have survived over 75 years in the same spot, often outliving the gardeners who planted them. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. Peonies planted in spring almost always sulk for 1 to 2 full years before blooming, while peonies planted in late summer, right now, use the cooling soil to establish a strong root crown and frequently bloom the very next spring. The trick is depth, and it's the single most common reason people fail with this plant. Peonies are shallow planters by nature. The eyes, the small reddish buds on the root you're planting, must sit no more than 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface. Gardeners who plant them like a regular perennial, 4 or 5 inches deep, end up with lush green foliage and 0 flowers for years because the plant physiologically will not bloom if it's buried too deep. It needs that shallow, chill exposure over winter to trigger flowering. The surprising fact most people don't know, peony roots are essentially small storage tubers, similar in function to a potato, which is exactly why they tolerate being dug up, divided, and shipped bare root through the mail in August, something very few other perennials can survive. And speaking of plants that get shipped and planted completely wrong, number 2 on this list is one that almost every big box store sells you with instructions that are quietly setting you up to lose half the plant by winter. Daylilies, the impossible-to-kill plant you're still killing. Daylilies have earned a reputation as nearly indestructible, and for the most part, that's true. They tolerate drought, poor soil, and neglect better than almost anything in the perennial world. But late summer planting is where most people quietly sabotage them without realizing it. They plant the crown too deep or too shallow, and the plant survives but never reaches full bloom potential for the first 2 or 3 years. The ideal planting depth for a daylily is precise. The crown, that thick white to yellow band where the leaves meet the roots, should sit exactly at soil level, not buried, not exposed. Bury it too deep, and the plant spends its energy pushing new growth upward, instead of building the fibrous root mass it needs before frost. Plant it too shallow, and the crown dries out and can rot over winter. Getting this 1 inch right is the difference between a daylily that blooms modestly next year and one that produces 2 or 3 dozen blooms per stalk by its 3rd season. Here's the fact almost no one knows. A single daylily flower only lives for 1 day, hence the name, but a mature, well-established clump can produce hundreds of individual blooms across a 6 to 8 week season, meaning the plant is never actually done blooming, even though each flower dies within 24 hours. Coming up at number 3 is a plant so shade-tolerant it's often the only thing standing between homeowners and a completely bare, muddy yard under mature trees, but almost everyone waters it wrong in its first season. 3. Hostas, the shade garden's backbone. Hostas are the single most popular perennial in American shade gardens for a simple reason. Almost nothing else thrives in dense shade the way they do. Planted in August, a hosta uses the remaining warm weeks to establish its root system before winter dormancy, then comes back in spring with noticeably larger leaves and a fuller crown than a spring-planted hosta of the same size. The mistake that costs people an entire growing season is watering hostas lightly and frequently instead of deeply and rarely. A newly planted hosta needs about 1 inch of water per week, delivered in 1 or 2 deep soakings rather than daily sprinkles, because shallow watering trains the root system to stay near the surface, which makes the plant far more vulnerable to the first hard freeze. Deep, infrequent watering pushes roots downward, below the frost line, which is exactly what you want heading into fall. The surprising fact, hostas are technically edible, and in parts of Japan, the young shoots, called irui, are harvested and sold as a spring vegetable, similar in taste and texture to asparagus. Quick pause here. I want to ask you something directly. How many perennials are actually growing in your yard right now? Not annuals you replace every year, but true perennials that come back on their own. If the honest answer is 0 or 1, you are exactly who this video is for, and I genuinely appreciate it if you hit subscribe right now, because the next 10 items get progressively more specific to different climate zones across the US, and I don't want you to miss the ones that apply to where you actually live. Drop a comment right now with your city or state, and I'll tell you, or someone else watching will, roughly how many weeks of planting window you have left this year. I read every single comment on these videos, so don't be shy. Purple coneflower, or Echinacea purpurea, is native to a huge swath of the central and eastern United States, which is exactly why it tolerates late summer planting so well. It evolved to establish quickly in exactly this kind of warm soil, shortening day window before a hard winter. Gardeners in USDA zones 3 through 9 can plant it right now with strong confidence it will survive to spring. What almost nobody tells you is that coneflower actually performs better in slightly poorer, well-drained soil than in rich, heavily amended garden beds. Overly fertile soil pushes the plant towards soft, leggy growth that's more vulnerable to winter dieback, while lean soil produces a shorter, sturdier plant with a denser root system, precisely what you want heading into the cold months. If your soil is naturally sandy or rocky, that's actually good news for this plant. The surprising fact, those spiky brown seed heads that form after the petals drop are not just decorative. They're one of the most important winter food sources for goldfinches, and cutting them back in fall, a habit many gardeners have, removes a food source birds depend on through the coldest months. Number 5 is a plant that most homeowners either love or actively try to remove from their yard, and one side is completely wrong. Item 5. Black-eyed Susan, the Rudbeckia, the weed that isn't. Black-eyed Susans get a bad reputation because they spread, sometimes aggressively, and homeowners who don't recognize them mistake volunteer seedlings for weeds and pull them out. In reality, this is one of the most reliable, low-maintenance perennials for American gardens, and August planting lets the root system anchor before the plant's natural self-seeding cycle kicks in. The critical detail for late-season planting, Rudbeckia needs full sun, at least 6 hours a day, to build the sturdy stems that will survive winter wind and snow load. Planted in partial shade, the stems grow tall and thin, reaching for light, and those weak stems are far more likely to snap or rot at the base before the plant can re-establish in spring. If your only available spot is shaded, this is not the right plant for that location, no matter how much you like it. The surprising fact: Black-eyed Susan is Maryland's official state flower, and its black-brown center combined with golden petals is said to have inspired the state's flag and Baltimore Orioles color scheme. Number 6 is where things get controversial, because I'm about to tell you to do the opposite of what every garden center recommends this time of year. Before item 7, and trust me, you want to see this one, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever bought a perennial from a big box store in the fall clearance section, assuming it was already too late to plant it, and just let it sit in its pot until it died? If that's you, don't feel bad. It happens to almost everyone, including me, years ago. That's exactly the mistake this video is designed to stop. If this is helping, tapping like right now genuinely tells YouTube to show this to more gardeners before their own planting windows close. It's the single biggest favor you can do for this channel today. Number 6 is Russian sage, the drought-proof screen plant. Russian sage looks fragile, tall, airy, silvery stems, but it is one of the most drought-tolerant perennials sold in the United States, native in spirit, though not in origin, to the same conditions as the American prairie. Planted in August, it needs surprisingly little water to establish, which makes it one of the easiest late-season plantings on this entire list for anyone worried about keeping up with watering through a hot end of summer. Here's what garden centers rarely explain. Russian sage should not be cut back in fall the way most perennials are. The woody lower stems act as insulation for the crown through winter, and gardeners who tidy it up in October, cutting it to the ground like they would a hosta, frequently lose the plant to winter kill. The correct move is to leave the stems standing until spring, then cut back hard once new growth appears at the base. The surprising fact: despite the name, Russian sage isn't a true sage at all. It's not even in the same genus, and it isn't primarily from Russia. It's native to a region spanning Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia, and was simply misnamed by 19th century botanists. Number 7 is the plant I promised you at the start of this video, and it's on this list specifically because of a mistake almost everyone makes with it every single autumn.
Item 7. Sedum Autumn Joy, the plant everyone accidentally kills by cleaning up. This is the one I teased at the beginning, and here's why it earns that spot. Sedum Autumn Joy is a succulent-leaved perennial that does something almost no other plant on this list does. It saves its best show for the exact moment most gardeners think their yard is finished for the year. The flower heads emerge pale green in summer, then slowly deepen to pink, then rust, then a deep bronze red through October and even into November in milder zones. The mistake, and it's shockingly common, is that homeowners see the fading flower heads in late September and assume the plant is dying, so they cut it down as part of routine fall cleanup. In reality, those bronzing seed heads are the plants at its peak ornamental value, and cutting them prematurely removes weeks of color, plus an important winter food source for birds, while also stripping away natural insulation that protects the crown through freezing temperatures. The correct approach is to leave the entire structure standing until early spring. The truly surprising fact most people don't know: Sedum Autumn Joy is one of the only ornamental perennials on this list that actually stores water in its thick, fleshy leaves the way a cactus does, which is why it can go 2 to 3 weeks without rain, even as a brand new August planting, and still establish successfully, making it nearly foolproof for anyone worried about missing a watering day during the busy back-to-school season. Number 8 is a plant beloved for its foliage more than its flowers, and almost nobody realizes it can change color mid-season based on how much sun it gets after planting. Item 8 is Coral Bells, the foliage chameleon. Coral bells are grown less for their small, delicate flower spikes and more for their foliage, which comes in colors ranging from deep purple-black to lime green to caramel orange. And remarkably, the exact same variety can shift shade depending on how much sun exposure it receives after planting. An August planting date is ideal because it gives the shallow, fibrous root system time to knit into the soil before the plant experiences a full winter freeze-thaw cycle. The single biggest killer of newly planted coral bells isn't cold, it's frost heave, a process where repeated freezing and thawing of the soil surface literally pushes the shallow-rooted crown upward and out of the ground over winter, exposing the roots to drying air and killing the plant by February, even though it's survived the actual cold. The fix is simple, but almost never mentioned. Apply a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch around but not touching the crown immediately after planting, which stabilizes soil temperature and largely prevents heave. The surprising fact? Coral bells are one of the very few ornamental perennials native specifically to North America's rocky woodland edges, and many modern nursery varieties were bred from wild populations found in the Appalachian Mountains. Coming up at number 9, a plant so fragrant that it's often planted specifically to repel pests, and almost no one realizes it does double duty as a pollinator magnet. Quick one before we keep going. Comment which of these 13 has surprised you the most so far. I genuinely read every comment, and I've changed what I cover in future videos based on what people tell me down there.
Item number 9. Catmint, the low-maintenance border champion. Catmint is one of the most forgiving perennials available to American gardeners, tolerating heat, poor soil, and drought better than nearly anything else on this list, which makes it an almost risk-free August planting choice for beginners. Its silvery green foliage and long bloom period of soft lavender blue flowers make it a favorite for edging walkways and garden borders. What most people don't realize is that catmint actually benefits from being cut back hard by about 1/3 to 1/2, roughly 4 to 6 weeks after an August planting, once it's finished its first flush of bloom. This might feel counterintuitive when you're trying to help a new plant establish, but that pruning triggers a second, often even fuller bloom cycle before frost, while also encouraging the plant to put energy into root development rather than continued top growth right as temperatures start dropping. The surprising fact, catmint is in the same genus as catnip, and while it does contain the same active compound, napatalactone, most cultivated ornamental varieties produce it in lower concentrations, meaning your cat might be curious but usually won't destroy your flower bed the way it would a patch of true catnip. Number 10 is one of the most old-fashioned grandmother garden perennials in America, and it's disappearing from nurseries for a reason most people never hear about. Item number 10, Shasta Daisy, the classic that's quietly vanishing. Shasta daisies were once a staple of nearly every American perennial garden, prized for their crisp white petals and sunny yellow centers. But many nurseries have quietly reduced how much shelf space they give this plant in favor of newer patented hybrids that generate more royalty income for breeders. That's unfortunate, because a well-established Shasta daisy, planted in August, is remarkably hardy and low maintenance. The detail that determines success or failure with a late summer Shasta daisy planting is division readiness. This plant's root clump becomes congested every 2 to 3 years, and a newly divided or newly purchased plant needs its roots gently teased apart before planting, not simply dropped into the hole as a tight root-bound mass. Skipping this step is the single most common reason August-planted Shasta daisies fail to establish. The roots continue growing in a tight circular pattern instead of spreading outward into the surrounding soil before winter locks it in place. The surprising fact, the original Shasta daisy was developed by the famous American horticulturist Luther Burbank in the late 1800s by crossbreeding several different daisy species from 3 different continents, making it one of the earliest deliberately hybridized garden perennials in U.S. history. Number 11 is a plant so tough it's sometimes found growing wild on roadsides, yet almost everyone plants it in soil that's actually too good for it.
Yarrow, Achillea, the roadside survivor.
Yarrow's ability to survive on roadsides, in ditches, and neglected lots isn't an accident. It's a genuinely tough, drought-resistant perennial with deep, fibrous roots that establish extremely quickly, which is exactly why it's one of the best choices for an August planting if you tend to forget to water. The counterintuitive truth about yarrow is rich, heavily fertilized soil is actually its enemy. In fertile garden beds, yarrow grows tall, floppy, and weak-stemmed, and it frequently flops over or splits apart at the crown before it can properly establish for winter. Planted in lean, well-drained, even slightly sandy soil, it stays compact and sturdy, with a root system that anchors far more effectively before the first freeze. The surprising fact? Yarrow has been used medicinally for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found yarrow pollen in Neanderthal burial sites dating back roughly 60,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously used medicinal plants in human history. Number 12 is arguably the single best perennial on this entire list, specifically for August planting, because it's actually designed by nature to start its life cycle at exactly this time of year. Number 12, asters, the perennial built for this exact month. Almost everything else on this list benefits from August planting. Asters are different. They practically demand it. As true fall bloomers, asters are genetically wired to put on their biggest show in September and October, which means planting them right now while they're actively budding or even blooming in their nursery pots gives you nearly instant color with zero waiting period, while the plant simultaneously builds its root system for next year. The mistake that trips people up is pinching timing. Aster growers who want a fuller, bushier plant traditionally pinch the growing tips back in early to mid-summer to encourage branching. But if you're planting in August, that window has already passed, and pinching now would only delay or eliminate this year's bloom entirely. For an August planting, the correct move is to let the plant bloom as is this year and save pinching next June if you want a fuller shape going forward. The surprising fact? Wild native asters are one of the single most important late-season food sources for migrating monarch butterflies, providing critical nectar at the exact time of year monarchs are fueling up for their journey to Mexico, meaning an August-planted aster bed can be actively feeding monarchs within just a few weeks. And that brings us to the final item, number 13. The one plant on this list isn't a flower at all, yet might do more for your garden's winter survival than anything else here.
Ornamental grasses like Karl Forster feather reedgrass are frequently overlooked because they don't produce showy flowers, but they solve a problem almost nobody thinks about until winter: garden structure. An August planting gives these grasses enough of the growing season left to establish a strong root crown, and by next summer, they'll reach their full mature height, often 4 to 6 feet, including the seed plumes. The detail that separates a thriving grasses planting from a struggling one is cutback timing, and this is where people get it backwards. Unlike most flowering perennials, ornamental grasses should absolutely not be cut back in fall. The dried, standing foliage provides essential insulation for the crown through winter and adds valuable visual structure to an otherwise bare winter landscape. Grasses should be left completely untouched until very early spring, cut back hard to just a few inches from the ground before new growth emerges. Cutting in fall exposes the crown to cold damage that can kill even a well-established plant. The surprising fact: Karl Forster feather reedgrass is a sterile hybrid, meaning it does not produce viable seed and cannot spread or become invasive the way many ornamental grasses can, which is exactly why it's one of the only grasses recommended without hesitation by conservation-minded gardeners across almost every U.S. state. Look back at everything we just covered: peonies that need shallow planting, daylilies that need exact crown depth, sedum that needs to be left alone when you think it's dying, grasses that need to stay uncut through winter. Notice the pattern. Almost every single mistake on this list isn't a mistake of effort, it's a mistake of timing and restraint.
Gardeners don't fail with perennials because they don't care enough. They fail because they do too much at the wrong moment, cutting back too early, watering too often, planting too deep, cleaning up too soon. That's really what this entire video has been about. August isn't a dead month for your garden. It's a quiet, easy-to-miss opportunity, a 4 to 8 week window where warm soil and cooling air do almost all the hard work for you, if you just get out of the plant's way and let its roots do what millions of years of evolution built them to do. Miss this window, and you're back to buying annuals every spring for the rest of your life. Use it, and you're building a garden that gets bigger, fuller, and more valuable every single year, for free, for decades. If this video just changed how you think about your fall garden schedule, the next video I'm putting out covers the exact opposite mistake, the 9 perennials people plant way too early in spring that end up dying because of it, and why patience in April matters just as much as urgency does right now in August. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because I'm timing that release to match exactly when spring planting mistakes start happening across the country. Thanks for spending 20 minutes of your day here with me. Go check your zone's first frost date, grab one of these 13 plants this weekend, and get it in the ground. Future you standing in that garden next June is going to be really glad you did. I'll see you in the next one.